I'm Max Kent, VP of Global Procurement and ESG at Compleat Software. We're a mid-sized digital procurement and purchase to pay and AP automation provider. We service about 500 customers. We range from probably 10 million turnover up to about 1 billion, so we're probably mid-tier, not really in the enterprise sector, but certainly deal with a lot of government organisations, multi-academy trusts, education providers, care home groups, multi-site businesses across the UK, US and Australia. I am finding it a little bit difficult to be upbeat today. To be honest, finding a focus for this presentation has not been easy, seeing what's going on out there in Ukraine. Obviously saw an image of a 6-year-old girl on the metro last night. I've got my own 6-year-old girl, so that's kind of, brought me a bit close to tears, to be honest. So I'm glad she's at home safe and well. But it's nice to see you all today anyway, and hopefully we can make this a great presentation. I think that the future of sustainable procurement is what I'm here to talk about today. I've just got to think about how relevant this is now, but the fact is it very much still is. We've still got a planet to work together to protect and help. So in our industry and procurement technology, I think this is the best way I can see for us all to do it. So really want to share some kind of thoughts with you on that today and about how we might work on this together. So if I move to the first slide, let's start with some basics. There's a lot of TLAs in sustainability. Now, I started in procurement and supply chain, but I think it's important for us all to go through some of these TLAs because I'm going to refer back to a few of them. So don't want to teach you to suck eggs, but I think it's important just to know what we're all talking about here. So there's a few of these I want to pick out, ESG being the first one. Obviously, that's environmental, social and governance. So that's quantitative and ratings based versus CSR, which was a buzzword a couple of years ago, probably less so nowadays, but it's still relevant. CSR is more qualitative and values based. IPCC, I think, is a really important one, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm going to come on to a little bit more about why that's important at the moment if you don't already know. And then obviously SECR is the other one that is worth talking about today because that plays into digital procurement. That's the streamlined energy and carbon reporting. So some of you I'm sure are aware of that already. And I want to talk in a little bit more detail about this and in my second session today. So again, I'm going to start with a bit of a stark warning really. In August last year, the IPCC, that's my first TLA, published their 6th iteration of the climate change report. And that was using in-depth scientific research and analysis to understand exactly what is happening with climate change. So their latest report was signed off by 234 scientists from 66 countries and reviewed by representatives of 195 member governments. The findings were 3 major takeaways. The one is that humans are unequivocally responsible for global warming. I know that's obvious to many, but it's their strongest statement yet. 2 is that some climate systems, such as continued sea level rise, is unfortunately irreversible. And number 3, it is very late, but thankfully not too late to avoid the worst impacts of climate breakdown. Now, the IPCC are just about to release their new report, and it may well have come out today. And that may have even further stark warnings on it. So the detail behind that is that the Earth is warmer than it's ever been since the last ice age, and that's 125,000 years ago. And CO2 in the atmosphere has reached levels not seen in 2 million years. The IPCC said it's more likely than not that the world would breach 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels by 2040. And that's a temperature rise that it said would bring multiple interrelated climate risks. One upshot of that, just to give you an example, is that some Pacific island nations may no longer exist by 2040. So the upshot of this for us is that drastic and immediate action is needed because by the time their next report comes out, the die will have already been cast and we're on our last warning. So let's go into ESG in a bit more detail. I'd like to highlight kind of firstly that this term really covers all elements within a business and it's activities that can either have a positive or negative impact on its employers, the customers and the world that it operates around. So when we look at those areas that ESG covers, how many of these do we think procurement has a part to play in? Now, from my point of view, it's all of them. So it's a real delight to be here actually because this is my 4th year at eWorld. First time I came here was just as a startup business, trying to see where I might fit into this. And I remember attending the seminars and there's some great speakers at the time thinking, I'd love to be involved in this. But the interesting part of that was that I always thought it would be something to do with some cool pricing comparison tool that I'd come up with, some sort of cost management thing that would get some supplier data and show you how to save money. And we are doing that sort of stuff. But sustainability, ESG, and how that plays into procurement, I think, is a real extra mission for us all. And it gives us a real part to play in that takes us in the procurement industry beyond where we were before and gives us a real drive. It certainly does for me, so hopefully you all see that as well. And what it's driving is collaboration between businesses, and I think we all need to just knowledge share and work out how we do this. So I'm living proof of that trend increasing. So when we think about the future of sustainable procurement, before we even start to think about that from a technology perspective, we just need to consider the key areas involved, and it's all of these that you can see here. So I think it helps to visualise a business requirement. So let's take a look at one area in particular of ESG, that's carbon emissions. So when we think about what our organisations do, how they operate, and apply that same logic to our customers, our suppliers, our partners, service providers, and pretty much anything we need throughout our own daily lives, we get the ability to view things at either a macro or micro level. So we start to consider all the different areas of that and how they could be made efficient. So efficiency, even in procurement terms, let alone business terms, could mean a variety of different measures. But in this context, we're just purely talking about how much carbon emissions each activity that's undertaken within a business that it needs to do to operate, the sum total of that, and measure how much each of those activities could be made more efficient and therefore more carbon efficient. So this picture illustrates this perfectly. And when you apply this to an enterprise business or even the sort of multi-site businesses we work with, you start to understand what's truly required to understand carbon emissions within an organisation. So it's all of these factors multiplied by however many sites, divisions, departments and areas you've got, multiplied by obviously the amount of suppliers and supply chain providers that organisation is using. And that's where it really starts to get complicated, and it's where procurement really does come into this. Next part of this that's important is intensity ratios. So what's an intensity metric or ratio? Well, that is the company's carbon intensity ratio. It's a metric that's used to quantify total carbon emissions. It's the most widely used benchmark to measure performance overall year on year, and it's critical for all organisations to understand when aiming for climate pledge goals such as net zero. So how's it calculated? It's in grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per pound or dollar of gross merchandised sales. So how can I find out mine for my own organisation? And that really is where it gets tricky because there's no real standard on this yet. There's a lot of companies trying to pull together to accurately work this out. But as you can imagine, some businesses don't necessarily want to disclose it. They might want to show that they're doing better than they actually are. It's difficult. So it's down to each organisation to measure and monitor this. So in order to calculate this figure, you'll need to know the total carbon emissions of your organisation across 3 emission scopes. Now, this plays into SECR reporting, streamlined energy and carbon reporting. So the government is asking for more and more reporting on this. So your 3 scopes is business travel, energy and utilities, and crucially, third-party supply chain emissions. And that's, if you've heard anything about scope 3, that's what that means. So anything that scope 3 on LinkedIn or anything like that, that's what it's talking about. It's your third-party supply chain emissions, and that's really where procurement comes into play. So some of the thinking out there, some of the research, and we'll see it on the tools, and up to 90% of carbon emissions within a business is within its third-party supply chain emissions. So if you want as a sort of analogy of that, you can change the light bulbs to LED, put solar panels on the roof of your business as much as you like. That's probably going to affect about 10% of your overall emissions because it's within your supply chain. That then gets you thinking about, well, it's all about collaboration because all of the suppliers and partners we work with have to drive the emissions between us. So that's about as far as I'm going to get into emissions and scoping on an SECR reporting in this session. But if you want to know more about that, I'm going to go more into that in my session at 12:35 p.m. So I'll get further into SECR reporting, carbon tracking itself. So summary of that is a intensity metric is really could be called a collaboration score because it shows how much businesses are working together really to drive down emissions across all business. So next thing, what's the sustainable procurement policy? What does that look like? Well, procurement generally has some form of insight on 40 to 80% of a company's turnover. Procurement is considered sustainable when organisations broaden that framework and it meets the needs for goods, services, works and utilities in a way that achieves value for money and promotes positive outcomes, not just for the organisation itself, but for the economy, the environment around it, and its society around it. So implementing a sustainable procurement policy significantly contributes to the company's global sustainable policy results. However, in a recent report that I read in 2020, only half of companies have required their suppliers to actually have sustainable business practices. So again, they're looking inward, but not necessarily outward yet. How do you do that is another question that I'll come to. So in summary, a sustainable procurement policy is the integration of CSR principles into your company's procurement processes and decisions while ensuring they still meet the requirements of your stakeholders. What's the benefits of having a sustainable procurement policy then? Well, some answers on this could be that the big example being, as we're seeing right now, companies are pulling away from investments with Russian partnerships because they don't have ESG strategies in place, not to mention everything else. They don't want to be seen to associate with those companies. That's how this plays into the current narrative, but we'll see this more and more with companies wanting to align with suppliers and partners that have their ESG policies in place. Again, how do we monitor that? Well, it's digital procurement, it's contract management, supplier relationship management. All of those tools will show us what suppliers we should be working with, and we can manage that through these kind of systems. And all of the systems we've got in the room today will have policies and things around that. There's some other real big wins for having a sustainable procurement policy in place, though. It reduces external environmental, economic and social risks. It fosters the competitive advantage and also increases a company's attractiveness for partners, customers and talents. We've actually seen this firsthand within our own organisation. Since we've started doing more around sustainability, our employees have actually given survey results back to say that they feel like it's a better place to work, it's a company they want to align with, and just from purely a retention point of view, it's a business they want to align with and stay with. It can drive internal change management, and it's certainly a great thing that we're seeing is at board level. It's helping our senior managers and directors align with it as well. It's the first time I've really seen a drive where CSR, ESG has been talked about and not dismissed by the board, and actually being something that they want to align with. There's investors looking at our company purely because we're now doing this. So it changes it from a business point of view. It's also cost efficient when you look at the whole life cycle of a product. From this point of view, this is how we see the cycle of best practice procurement playing into sustainable procurement. So this cycle here is the sort of ever growing wheel of how things fit together. So number one on this cycle is AP and purchasing automation. So for us, that's cutting down on paperwork and resource, but the key to it is getting a digitized invoice into your system. So every invoice you receive should be going into some piece of software. The data from it should be extracted. The AP process should be automated, and that's the start of this whole process. If we don't have that in place, then we're not going to be able to get the data to really drive the ESG goals, and I'll show you why that matters in a second. The digital invoice capture also cuts down on administration. We see 90% reduction in AP teams. We then play into things like advanced spend analytics and business intelligence tools to actually get into procurement, looking at line level data and working out costs, who's buying what from where. Were we even able to see that data before? Possibly not. Where was it coming from? Was it a real-time view? One of my old jobs was a procurement consultant, and so we'd go into businesses and look at how we could save them money. And you'd get pointed at the filing cabinet, and then you'd have to start scanning invoices. And it might give you a snapshot in time of where you could save money, but what happens next month and the month after that when you need that data again? Without these sort of digital automation tools, and I'm not just talking about Compleat, I'm talking about every business in this building really that's here today, they all should be supplying these kind of services for you, and that's the point of them, really to automate it. So we're all trying to achieve the same goals. We're then playing into things like digital procurement tools that I've spoken about already, so SRM, supplier relationship management, contract management, source to pay, and then into scope 3 carbon tracking. They're all things that will help us achieve the goals in sustainable procurement. And then the cycle continues. So once we've reviewed our results, once we've got that data, we can then make choices about which suppliers we do want our businesses to buy from, and then we can enforce that through the technology, and the cycle continues. The next 3 slides are a bit of a special overview. This is our new carbon footprint tracker. So the key point behind that is without that spend data captured from the AP automation or digital procurement software tool, you can't get a real-time view of how your third-party Scope 3 supply chain carbon emissions are actually impacting your company. So you may be able to get a specialist to come in and help, and there's a lot of them out there, but the real key to consistently reducing carbon emissions within your supply chain is true visibility through procurement software that's capturing all of your supplier spend data and providing real-time updates of how these numbers are changing over time. So what this tool is doing, and this is live data from one of our customers, a 35-site care home group. So this is their actual spend up till now. It's a screenshot of their tool that they're actually using right now. They're using this anyway to look at their procurement and spend analytics, so their teams use this to drive spend, but they've just implemented our new carbon tracking element. So this is live data, and what this is doing is pulling intensity ratio data from our carbon specialist team in the background and multiplying it against that customer's spend. So here we can see they've spent 55 million in, I think probably since 2018 when they started using the tool. We categorise all the data so we can see which areas they're spending in. We can get this data, it comes in right down to line level, so we can see it at line item detail, at supplier level. This is just the top level dashboard, but what you can see straight away is we have 55 million spend against 2,487 suppliers. However, that's creating 23,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions. And across the 3 scopes, because we can map all 3 within the tool, you can see there that 89% of it is in their scope 3. So again, this is the first time we've really been able to see this data. It's the first time we've really showed this tool. We've been working on the background for the last 6 to 8 months, and we're getting real kind of interest in this because it's the first time we can really see this data. When you think about SECR reporting, how else are you going to calculate this kind of stuff? How are you going to get to that supplier data? If you look at the government website on SECR reporting, it says that you should have this information already from your suppliers on invoices. Well, that's great, but we all know how that goes. And if you think about what I've just spoken about AP automation and going to the filing cabinet, how do you get that data? So let's just show you a couple more of these. This is where we categorise. So you can see that we can get emission spend per category. So we can see where the lump of the emissions is. And with this company, it's in the construction and engineering. Clearly, there's quite a bit in energy. But again, that huge carbon emission spend is within their third-party supply chain. So when they're putting up new care homes, when they've got people coming in to build new sites or maintain those sites, it's those companies that are causing the issue for them. And within the reporting, that's part of their emissions as well. We can see that further when we get down to supplier level. So you can start to see some names here. There's suppliers that some of you may well have heard of, and we can see exactly what their emissions impact is per supplier. We can obviously get further into this report. There's lots more filters and report elements of this. We can drill right into a supplier by month, what the impact was in particular months in time. We can draw reports out of this in the format that's needed for SECR, and there's various different things we can do with this. But it's the first time businesses can actually see which suppliers are causing the most impact. The best thing about this is then generating those conversations between procurement and suppliers to say, actually, we still want to work with you. And you can see the ones at the top. There's one at the top, the construction firm is causing a big impact. The first thing that I certainly would do in procurement, and this is what they are doing, is speaking to that supplier to say, what are you doing to reduce your carbon emissions intensity ratio? We see it as this. Do you agree with that? Because it's still quite finger in the air of how that's calculated. Even the way I've spoken about it, I think there'd be a lot more that's done to make that more scientific. There's certainly people that want to put in place global standard ratings and things like that. That's going to be a while off. When we get there, brilliant, and that will make the whole thing more accurate. But right now, this is as good as it gets. And when they can see this, they can argue that and say, actually, we know we've done a lot in the last month or the last 2 months to reduce our carbon emissions. We think our ratio should be this, and we can update that within the tool. The ratios are pulled through on a monthly basis anyway, so we constantly update. So this is about having that real-time view where we can see the activities within a business that they're doing to drive down their own emissions actively working. So when they look at this tool and review it in a month's time and a month after that, if they're doing the correct work with their supply chain, they should see their emissions go down. And that's the way to properly drive it. There's a lot of organisations now looking at this that are sort of larger than the care home group within our base. There is some bespoking we have to do to the reports to make it fit for the organisation that wants to use it, but that's not an issue. And again, it's just a great thing to sort of work out how to drive things forward. I'm going to go on to some other things around integrated buying in a sec and how that also helps sustainable procurement. But just before I move on, has anyone got any questions on this at all? Because it's quite new. Sure.
So on this platform, are you, in this particular case, would the suppliers sort of input on a regular basis their intensity ratios?
Yeah, so the carbon specialist we work with has a centralised database of every intensity ratio of every UK business at the moment. We're working on a US equivalent at the moment. That's obviously a lot more difficult. So this is UK based for the moment. That intensity ratio is updated on a monthly basis centrally anyway. Suppliers themselves can challenge that ratio and change their own ratio within the database. So they can say, we don't agree with that, we think we're better than that. And if they can prove that, then we can update it and it will show that their impact is less on the tool.
I'm sorry, what was the organisation that hosts the ratios?
They're an in-house team that we've got. So yeah, we've recruited carbon specialists into our business to actually work on this. So we've been working in the background on this for about a year to recruit sort of carbon specialists and data scientists into this role. So yeah, that gives it the credibility, but certainly we can provide more credibility on how we've actually come to this point.
Just a couple of questions on output and improvement.
Sure.
Taking the improvement first, if you look at a profile like that where you've got a massive, clearly they're building something.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
yeah.
And just by nature of pouring concrete, you're going to use a hell of a lot of carbon. So presumably what could look a bit odd is they don't build something next year and suddenly they've had a massive reduction in their carbon, but they haven't actually quotes done anything.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question is, if you get a company like Dealey Construction, I can't work out where the supply chain reporting ends, because would Dealey be also reporting on their total carbon use? In which case, is this double counted against that?
No, well, it's that sole total of that company's activity. So it's only the ratio, that only gives the ratio. So the ratio is actually multiplied by how much this business has spent with them. So
correct, but so they're saying we use this much carbon.
Yep.
But isn't Dealey Construction also reporting that much carbon being used?
No, because it's only the ratio. So they report on that. So it's only the ratio. It's not their emission. It's not the total emission of the company. That just gives us a number to multiply the spend against. So yeah, because you're right. It would be double counting if you did it, if you included the whole thing. But it's not their total emissions. It's just their impact ratio, if you like, multiplied against how much they spent. So this company spent 7.2 million with them, multiplied against their intensity ratio at the moment is giving a 2.6 thousand tonne impact. If Dealey Construction then say, well, we think we're lower than that, we've got electric vehicles in, we've done put all the steps in place to reduce our own impact, then that number should come down. So that's what we want to see on a monthly basis. And that's where I think the data and the digital procurement tools play on this, because we've seen costs of carbon specialists, sort of 5,000, 10,000, just to do one hit of this. So they'll look at it and say, okay, here's your snapshot of your impact. We can look at your supply chain as well. This is what we think you are. So again, what happens next month? And if we've reduced it, do we have to pay again and again to keep seeing our results of what we've done? Do we just recruit someone in-house? What skills do we need to recruit in? Still, for me, it comes back to needing that data from somewhere. Any more questions on that at all before I move on? Okay, just one more slide to go through. Slightly different topic. I just wanted to talk about our new punch-in feature. This is with Amazon Business at the moment, but what to point out here is, although we work with Amazon Business, this technology works with any supplier. So the point of showing you guys this is, when you're looking to put these kind of procurement tools in place in your organisation, even if you understand what I'm saying and go, great, this sounds great, we want to put something like this into our organisation, the next problem you might be faced with, if you're not doing this already, is that you need a login and a licence for every single user. And that can be quite costly. If you've got hundreds of users in your organisation, even if they place an order once a year, they still need to pay a full licence to log into the system. With this punch-in solution, they don't need to do that. So I'll show you how that works and just play the video in a sec so you can see exactly how it does work. But that can hugely cut down the cost. Certainly for the schools we work with, it means that their end users can buy from Amazon or other suppliers, and they don't actually have to have any kind of login to the system. As long as that organisation has a license to our software, they don't have to pay the full user cost. So it's a huge cost saving for organisations that just want to control process. So I'm just going to flick to the video on this one and just show you quickly how this works. So if you imagine this is an end user just literally going to the Amazon website, they haven't logged into Compleat or the purchasing tool at all yet. So with government frameworks, Amazon works through YPO frameworks, so it can be controlled, restricted product lists and things like that. So they can access their own logins and don't have to go to a wider pricing set. So it'll work with any pricing or discount login on any supplier website. As long as you've got your account set up with that particular supplier, your delivery addresses will obviously all be there anyway. So you can send your goods to wherever you need them to. The key part is when you push the order back. So if anyone's aware of how punch out works, you'd obviously have to go to your P2P tool, select the supplier, punch out to the website, raise your purchase order and bring it back in. With this, what it's going to do is you've raised your order in Amazon or your supplier's website and you're just pushing the order to the system without actually logging in. So I've got now my purchase order screen, it's got the correct data in there. So I'm raising a purchase order in the correct way that the organisation specified for me. I've got my justifications in there. I can, it will scroll down in a minute so I can see the line item detail, which we obviously pull straight into our spend analytics. So from a procurement point of view, we can see all that data correctly, correct product codes, correct supplier codes. So for any procurement activities, we would get in the back end, correct line item detail. All the end user has to do is code it, put the right budget codes on there, make sure it's got all the right detail in there. They send that order out and that's the last thing they have to do. So they come straight back out the system and no login. So that is basically for the cost of, I think it's probably around 15 pence that's cost them versus some user licenses in the past to access this could be 150 quid at least per user. It just gets rid of all of that cost and means that the whole order goes into the system in the right way. So we've captured the data, the business itself has the right structure in place for its procurement, but the end users haven't had to get involved in all the detail. That pretty much concludes the talk today. I'd love to answer any more questions you've got. If not, thank you very much for your time. No questions at all?
Well, yeah, just one. In your experience, if you
Yeah.
look at organisations as they are now, I mean, it's a hopeless question to answer.
I'll try.
If scoring 10 is they're really starting to walk the talk,
Yeah.
and one is they're just talking the talk, where do you feel things are at the moment in terms of people really starting to properly deliver on this?
The interesting thing with the intensity ratios and the carbon stuff that I've shown you is, certainly from our point of view, we're putting that through to purchase order stage as well. So that's the next thing, is having a traffic light system where end users raise a purchase order and they can see, I'm going to place an order with this supplier, I'd like to, but it's coming up as a red because their emissions intensity ratio is low. Or is high, sorry, so their impact is massive. Actually, I might use a different supplier. We ran one with one of our customers and we just did a Amazon versus Office Depot comparison. And Amazon was half the carbon emissions of Office Depot on exactly the same spend. So that is where it really will make a difference because it's financial based. So if it's commercial activity that shows that business is losing business because of its ESG rating, that's where it really will make a difference. And I think it's the one thing that's going to affect this. Everything else is just sort of superficial compared to that, really. Any more? Well, I'm here at 12:35 as well, and I'm going to go further into that tool, so please do come to that session if you're still around. As I said, well done for making it, and it's great to see you all here. So come and see me if you want to speak further. I've got cards. Come to our website, drop me a line, find me on LinkedIn or however. I'd love to speak to you all further. But thank you very much for your time today.